Thank you to everyone that has joined this afternoon. We are going to spend the afternoon looking at what we call the perfect tenses. And I'm sure that you will have learned a bit about tenses at school. So when we speak about tenses, we are speaking about the past, the present, and the future as our main tenses. Now, within those tenses, they are split into four little bits. And the little bit that we are going to be looking at today is called the perfect part of it, okay? And to create the perfect part of the tense, we need to be able to create what we call a past participle. And when we are speaking about past participles, it is a form of a verb. And if you use regular verbs, they end in ed. And the past participle is the same as the past tense verb. So if I have play, the past participle is played. If I have cook, the past participle is cooked. They are regular verbs, okay? Irregular verbs, unfortunately, they don't follow the same rules. So if I have the irregular verb drink, the past participle is drunk, okay? The past tense verb is drank. So just be aware of the difference between the past tense verbs and your past participles. If you have the verb go, your past participle is gone. If you have the verb come, it is still come as your past participle, okay? So those are sets of words that you are going to need to learn. And I'm sure that you will have looked at some of these in school, okay? So we are going to start off with the past. And when we look at all of the tenses, there is a positive form of using it, there's a negative form of using it, and there is a question form as well. And we are going to look at how each of those are structured this afternoon. So we're going to begin with the past perfect. And we use this to describe something that happened in the past and it continued up until a certain point in the past. So when we use this, you will often refer to other events, and you sometimes use past perfect with the past simple in the same sentence. And that is because when we use past perfect, you sequence events, okay? So let's have a look at the positive formation of it. So when we form the positive, whether you are looking at the subject he, she, it, or they, it doesn't matter. You would still use had, okay? So you're using the auxiliary verb, the helper verb had, and then you would use the past participle. So if you look here, she had left is the past perfect bit of the tense sentence here, and we're linking it with by the time he arrived. So you've got the past simple in there as well. It's sequencing those events. And then we had baked a cake, and you will often see time sequencing words within the past perfect. So before is saying when we had baked the cake, okay? And then um, by dinner time, again, this is the time word. And here it says she had, instead of saying she had explored, you have got she had already explored. So it's already happened, okay? So that is how you form the positive. Now, like all of the other tenses, when we are forming the negative, we use not. Okay, so in this perfect tense, you would say past perfect, she had not. Or you might shorten it with your contraction to hadn't. So in this one here, we're still sequencing the events. So we've got here, she had not left by the time he arrived. So it's sequencing when she hadn't left in this case. And then we had not travelled or hadn't travelled to London and before now. So that is the time in that specific sentence. And the final one, he was tired because something that he hadn't done. So he hadn't eaten. And you can use either the full version, had not, or you can use hadn't as your contraction. Okay. And the final structure is when we ask questions. So the question form, you would put, sometimes you would have a question word at the beginning. So where, and you're switching the subject and the auxiliary verb around. So where had they been? And then you've got the sequence of events here before they met us. So they'd been somewhere before the group of people met up. And then this one, had you woken before the alarm? So notice a lot of these are having, we did something either before or they did it after. So it's the sequence of events that is important with the perfect tense. And then had we checked the weather again before planning the trip? So with the question, you've got had, then the subject, and then the past participle. So with the past perfect, it is usually used to sequence events, okay? The present perfect has a different use, and there are many different reasons that we use the present perfect. So you might talk about things that you have achieved in your life, things that you have done. You might talk about actions that have been finished. It might also be, instead of using the past simple, you might use the present perfect for things that have recently been completed. And it can also be used to show things that haven't quite finished at this point in time, okay? So although it is called the present perfect, it isn't always about things that are happening at this particular moment in time. And when we form the positive part of the tense, we have two choices of auxiliary verb, two choices of helper verb, and you need to decide if you use have or has. Now, if you are using have, you would use it for I have, you have, they have, and we have. If you are using has, it is your third person. So he, she, it, or someone's name. Okay, so just think about whether you need the have or the has when you're forming this particular part of the tense. And again, you would still use the past participle. So all parts of the perfect tense, you're using that past participle within it. So I have lost my keys. It is stating that something has happened very recently. Okay. And hopefully you would be looking for them and you would find them. Man has traveled in space. That's showing an accomplishment. It's showing what someone has achieved. Um, I have lived here for 5 years. It's showing what you have done in your life. And it is an uncompleted action because I am still living here. So it is an action that started, but it isn't completed yet. And then she has visited London. Again, it is showing some sort of achievement in someone's life or something that someone has done within their life. Okay, so that's the positive. The negative is formed in a very similar way to the past perfect and the negative. So it would be have or has, and then the not. Okay. And remember, you can make these into contractions. So haven't is have not, hasn't is has not. Okay. So again, it is looking at sort of negative achievements almost. So Mark has not learned to swim. It's an achievement that he hasn't managed to achieve. Jack has not travelled to Spain. It's something that he hasn't accomplished yet. And then they have not visited here. And then for many years, it kind of shows that they've been there before, but they haven't been there recently. Okay, so again, it is an achievement that they have achieved. And the last one, where it says we haven't had, it sounds a bit strange because you're using the have not and the had in the same sentence, but it is saying that the computers are working properly. There's been no problems with them. Okay, so that is how you form the negative part of the present perfect. Then the question part is exactly the same as the past perfect. So the question part, you've got your have or your has, then you have the subject, and then you have that past participle. So it's asking the question, has Mark learned to swim? It's asking about his accomplishments. Have you seen that movie? It's asking about like the action. Have you been there before? So um, it is to do with whether you've done it or not. And you will often find with these specific questions, you will sometimes see the ever. So, have you ever ridden a horse? Have you ever eaten sushi? Have you ever studied French? So, the ever part in it indicates that has it been done before in your lifetime? Okay. And then, have you studied for the test? Would kind of indicate that the test is imminent and you should have been working towards it. And then the final one, has she met her new teacher? Would indicate that either she's started a different school or the class has a new teacher. So it is kind of something that has recently happened to that particular person. So that is the present perfect. And then the final part of the perfect tenses is the future perfect. Okay. And the future perfect, again, it has several different uses. It is used to show an action that will be finished by a certain point in the future. And often you will have time words within the sentence to show when the action is finished, or it's used to show the order of events in the future. So, one action that's going to be completed before a separate action. And when we use the future perfect tense, we are using an auxiliary verb that is will along with the have. So you will have what I tend to call a verb chain rather than a verb phrase, because I'm sure that you've learnt at school phrases don't have verbs in them. So you will have a verb chain of 3 words for this particular tense. So will have completed. And then you've got the time word when it will be completed by. Okay. We will have had dinner when before you arrive. So that is when you will have had dinner. Or I will have finished my homework before dinner is when the homework will be finished by. Okay. And then when we are talking about the negative form of it, the verb chain is even longer because you still have the will, but then instead of saying will have not, you say I will not have. So often we say I won't have. Okay, so we use a contraction with it. So again, you've got those time words in here. They won't have found it by tonight, the time that they won't have found it by. They will not have had breakfast before you arrive. So you've linked it to the second action within the sentence. And I won't have watched the film before dinner is when you won't have watched it by. And then the final part of the future perfect is asking the question, okay? And with the question, you've got the will, then the subject, and then the have and the verb part of it, okay? So here you've got will they have built, and then it gives you the time by next year, okay? And then if you're running a bit late, you might ask, will the train have departed or will the train have left before we arrive? So again, this bit here is the time part of it. And then what books? So that's just the extra bit of information. Will you have read is the perfect part of it. And then by summer, it's when will you have read them by. And you can also use this to kind of talk about the future. So by the time you are 30, will you have travelled overseas? Or if you're doing it in the positive, you could say, by the time I'm 30, I will have travelled overseas. So you can kind of turn it into the positive as well. And then this one, it's got the time part at the beginning. By next week, will you have finished? And then your homework is what is being finished. Okay, so if you are watching the recording, I hope that you have enjoyed it, and I hope that you will watch more of the recordings in the future.